He couldn't see the road, he couldn't see the cage, but he remembered the scent of blood and the sound of chains. That morning, in the quiet woods of Aspen Ridge, a blind German shepherd named Blaze turned off the patrol trail and refused to move. Sheriff Carter Wells followed him without knowing why. What they found beneath the dirt changed everything. A buried cage, 2 puppies clinging to life, and a past Blaze could no longer outrun. He couldn't see the world, but somehow, he led others to freedom, and that's where this story begins. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The wind hadn't yet finished its long argument with the mountains of Aspen Ridge. Snow from the last storm still clung to tree limbs like forgotten ghosts, and the air carried that sharp scent of cedar bark and something older, silence. It was just past 6:00 a.m., and the sky above Colorado was still deciding whether to offer light or more storm. Sheriff Carter Wells stood alone at the edge of Timber Hollow, a pine-thick stretch at the border of county land, boot soles crunching on thawed gravel. Carter was 46, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face carved more by grief than age. His beard was salt and pepper and always trimmed to regulation, though no one was left to regulate him anymore. He wore his dark brown sheriff's coat zipped up to the collar, the badge dulled with snowmelt, his fingers gloved and closed around a heavy flashlight. A quiet man by nature, Carter had spent the last 4 years raising his daughter and trying not to fall apart after his wife, Evelyn, had died in a sudden avalanche rescue gone wrong. Since then, he rarely raised his voice and never smiled with his teeth. People in town said he walked like someone carrying a secret too heavy for one back. Beside him, the forest exhaled, and in that breath, he heard it. Not a howl, not a cry, a silence too deliberate. His flashlight swept across the snow-slick trail. At first he thought it was a tree stump, until the shape shifted just enough to prove it was something living. Tucked beneath the charred remains of an old trail sign was a dog. No collar, no movement, no sound. Carter stepped closer, his boots cautious in the frost-crusted dirt. The dog was a German shepherd, full-grown but underweight. Mud clung to its fur like bruises. Its muzzle was bound tight with old rope, crusted with rust and dried blood. But what struck Carter hardest was the cloth wrapped around the dog's head, a wide, fraying blindfold made of deep blue canvas, the kind used in tarps or old work aprons. It covered both eyes, tied roughly behind the ears. The dog didn't flinch, didn't cower. It just waited. "I don't know who you are," Carter said under his breath, "but you've made it this far." He knelt slowly, his breath puffing in the morning air, with gloved hands. He reached out, not to touch, but to offer presence. The dog, still as a statue, gave no sign of aggression, just a subtle shift in posture, as if hearing the weight of sincerity. And that was enough. 15 minutes later, Carter had the dog in the back seat of his patrol truck, nestled in a thermal blanket that smelled faintly of pine soap and old coffee. The heat was turned up full, and the dog, still silent, lay curled like a question without an answer. Carter glanced into the rearview mirror and whispered, "You look like fire trying to remember it was ever flame. We'll call you Blaze." Back at the Aspen Ridge Sheriff's Office, the building still bore the bones of its 1950s foundation, wood beams, narrow hallways, and a coffee machine that wheezed more than brewed. The back kennels were used sparingly, mostly for rescues or strays. Carter carried Blaze himself, arms steady despite the dog's dead weight. Blaze never once growled or squirmed. At the front desk sat Deputy Harriet Lorne, mid-30s, a sharp-jawed woman with a Boston accent, frizzy red hair tied in a loose bun, and the kind of personality that either hugged or punched. She lifted an eyebrow as Carter walked past. "You've got another lost soul." Sheriff Carter nodded once. He didn't bark, he didn't move, just waited. Harriet stood and followed him down the hall. "That's not a stray, that's a survivor." He placed Blaze gently into the cleanest kennel, laying the blanket across the cement floor. Then he took one long look before turning away. June Wells was 14 and rarely seen outside of her hoodie, slender and pale, With long black hair usually tucked beneath a knit beanie, she walked like someone trying to disappear since her mother's death. She'd stopped talking much at school, avoided crowds, and found refuge in the sheriff's office where her father worked. Her safe place was the corner office with the window seat, a sketchbook always in her lap. That morning, she came to the office early, slipping in through the side door, her boots half-laced. Her father was still in the back. The building felt like it always did, half asleep, half listening. Then she heard it. Not barking, not whimpering, just the quiet weight of breath, slow and controlled. She tiptoed down the hall toward the kennels, stopping just outside the first stall. Her eyes widened. There he was, a German shepherd with blue cloth tied gently around his head, fur matted, face unreadable. He didn't look like the dogs on posters or on TV. He looked like someone who'd already fought the war and was just waiting to be told it was over. June stood there for a long time. She didn't speak, didn't call for her dad. She just watched him. And he, though blind, lifted his head slightly, as if he knew she was there. She blinked. He tilted his ear, and without realizing it, June smiled. It wasn't much, not wide, not loud, but it was the first one she'd given in months that wasn't attached to a lie. The snow in Aspen Ridge had begun to soften, retreating from the edges of pine roots and gravel roads like a sigh after holding breath too long. The air still held a bite, but the kind that hinted spring might eventually remember this part of the world. Inside the sheriff's station, the radiators groaned with effort, and the smell of weak coffee mingled with something older, antiseptic, cedar wood, and the slow ache of old memory. Blaze lay curled in the corner of the kennel, his breathing steady but shallow. The blue blindfold remained tied gently around his head, slightly crooked now from the way he'd shifted through the night, though still silent. There was a tension in his stillness, not fear, but a kind of waiting, like a soldier not yet called to stand. June Wells arrived just after 9:00 a.m., notebook pressed against her chest. Her long black hair was tied into a low, uneven braid, and her hoodie hung off one shoulder as usual. She passed Deputy Harriet with a nod and walked straight to the kennel wing without speaking. Her boots squeaked faintly against the tile. That morning, she brought a book. It was a worn paperback of short stories, ones her mother used to read to her before bed. The cover was curled from years of use, the pages yellowed at the corners. She pulled a folding chair close to the kennel gate, sat cross-legged, and opened to a random page. "You don't have to understand the words," she said softly to Blaze. "You just have to know they're meant for you." She began to read, voice barely louder than the hum of the heaters. Blaze didn't move, but his ears twitched at certain syllables, at the rhythm of her breath between sentences. June read for over an hour, pausing only to glance up and check if he had shifted. He hadn't, but she kept going. By the time she reached the last paragraph, her voice had steadied, her throat warmed. Then, almost without thinking, she reached her hand through the gate bars. Her fingers hovered inches from Blaze's chest, and there it was, a slow, subtle rise in his breathing, a muscle tightening under fur. His head didn't move. He didn't retreat. June's hand lowered. Her fingertips touched fur, coarse, damp in places, soft in others. She rested her palm gently against his chest, feeling the heartbeat beneath the ribcage. Thump, thump, thump. Her own breath caught. She didn't speak. Blaze didn't flinch. And in that quiet, something broke open between them. Not wide, not loud, but real. That afternoon, Sheriff Carter Wells sat in his office, surrounded by reports. He hadn't noticed how many had piled up in the last 6 months. Missing dog notices, animal control memos, unverified complaints from nearby counties. Most were dismissed as routine, strays, runaways, lost pets. But now, a pattern had begun to form. He sorted them by hand, dragging yellow post-its across his desk like battlefield markers. Every case involved a large breed, German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even a retired bloodhound once used for search and rescue, all unchipped, all gone without trace. Some were found days later, wandering weak, tails tucked, collars missing. Others were never seen again. He picked up one file dated nearly 2 months prior, A rancher outside Pine Bluff reported a barking frenzy one night. Then silence. His 2 guard dogs vanished. No blood, no signs of escape, just gone. Carter rubbed his temples. A dull ache pulsed behind his left eye. That's when he heard it. A faint chime, soft, metallic, not the door, not a phone, a wind chime. He stood, moving toward the window. Hanging outside the back entrance was an old brass wind chime, salvaged from his father's cabin and kept more for memory than music. It rarely rang, only when the wind was just right. He opened the door. The chime danced once in the breeze. From the kennel wing came a noise, short, low, sharp, Blaze. Carter hurried down the hall. When he reached the kennel, Blaze was standing, not tall, not rigid, but alert. His head tilted slightly toward the source of the sound, his ears pointed forward under the blue cloth. He let out a soft, guttural growl, not aggressive, but troubled. June stood frozen, book still open in her lap. He just stood up when the chime rang. Carter knelt, eyes narrowing. "You heard it too?" June nodded. He looked at Blaze, who was now slowly lowering back into a seated position, head bowed. The chime rang again, and Blaze flinched, not from fear, from memory. That evening, Carter sat across from Deputy Harriet in the break room, both nursing lukewarm coffee. "You think he recognizes the sound?" Harriet asked. "I think it's more than that," Carter said. "I think wherever he came from, there were chimes like that, and not in a good way." She frowned, like conditioning or a signal. He muttered, "Start, stop, come, attack." Harriet leaned back. "Then we might be looking at something darker." Carter nodded. "We need to find out where he came from, and fast." At that same hour, in a dimly lit house on the edge of Carson Bluff, a man with a sunken jaw and ash-colored teeth flipped through a set of photographs. His name was Trevor Nash, late 40s, lean and cold-eyed, known in whispers across state lines for training aggressive dogs in underground circuits. He wore a flannel shirt over scarred arms and a gold chain with a cross that had long since lost its shine. He paused at one photo. A German shepherd, blindfolded in blue, half-curled on concrete. A younger man beside him, Kane, mid-20s, shaved head, restless hands, leaned over, that the one from Timber Hollow. Trevor's smile was thin. He remembers the bell. Should we take him back? Trevor's eyes narrowed. Not yet. He'll lead us to the others. The sun over Aspen Ridge filtered through thin bands of cloud, casting a soft, washed-out glow across the melting snowbanks and muddy trails. It was late morning, and the wind carried the crisp scent of thawed pine needles and old bark. Sheriff Carter Wells stood beside his patrol truck, one boot propped against the wheel, watching Blaze step out of the station for the first real time. Blaze moved slowly but deliberately, his frame lean, muscles wiry beneath his sable and tan coat. The blindfold, now a clean, deep blue cotton band wrapped neatly around his eyes, shifted slightly with every movement. He didn't stumble, he didn't hesitate. Instead, he sniffed the air with a quiet purpose, ears twitching in response to every small sound. Carter hadn't planned to bring him along, but something about the way Blaze had stood that morning, head tilted toward the door, tail low but firm, told him today wasn't meant to be ordinary. He opened the passenger door and gave a quiet command. Up. Blaze jumped in without pause, settling into the seat like he belonged there. They drove out toward the east edge of Aspen Ridge, where the roads turned to gravel and the forest reclaimed what had once been farmland. The area hadn't had a call in weeks, but Carter often patrolled it, more from habit than duty. Today, the silence felt heavier than usual. Blaze sat alert beside him, not restless, just listening, occasionally. He'd lift his head and turn toward a distant sound. Birds, wind, a branch cracking under snow weight. 15 minutes in, Carter slowed near an old service road, mostly swallowed by brush. He'd passed it dozens of times. It led to nowhere but forgotten fence lines and collapsed sheds. Then Blaze shifted. At first, it was subtle, a turn of the neck. A breath held slightly too long. Then he whined, soft, unsure, but clearly directed toward the passenger window. Carter pulled over. Blaze was up, pressing gently against the door. His tail wasn't wagging, But it wasn't tucked either. Something had triggered him. "You want to check it out?" Carter asked. The whine came again. Firmer. Carter opened the door. Blaze leapt down and began walking. Not fast, but with a strange confidence, as though he could see things the human eye had long forgotten. Carter followed, hand near his radio out of caution. They passed through overgrown brush, dead leaves, and a patch of damp soil where deer tracks had faded in the morning thaw. Blaze kept his nose low, occasionally pausing, then adjusting his course. Then he stopped. Before them lay a low patch of earth, moss-covered and marked by disturbed leaves. Blaze pawed once, then twice, then stepped back. Carter knelt and cleared away the top layer of forest debris. His fingers struck rusted metal. He froze, digging with both hands now. Carter unearthed what appeared to be a small cage door, about 3 feet by 2, barely visible under a web of roots and soil. The metal was aged, the hinges stiff. With a grunt, he forced it open. Inside were 2 puppies, golden brown fur, matted and damp. Their bodies curled tightly into each other, eyes barely open. One let out a faint whimper, the other didn't move. Carter's breath caught in his throat. He pulled his jacket off, wrapping both pups gently inside, lifting them with practiced care. He turned to Blaze. The shepherd stood perfectly still, ears alert, head turned slightly toward the sound of the pup's whimper. "You found them," Carter murmured. "You really found them." Blaze's ears twitched once, then he sat, back at the station. Carter moved quickly. He called Deputy Harriet for blankets, warm fluids, and a spare kennel. The puppies were cleaned and placed under a heat lamp. A local vet would arrive shortly, but for now, they were safe. Blaze lay outside the room where they rested, his body stretched out against the tile floor, head toward the door. He hadn't moved since their return. Word spread faster than Carter expected. Harriet posted a short update on the department's page. 2 puppies found alive in remote forest trap, thanks to a very special deputy. She included a photo, Blaze lying near the cage, blue blindfold catching the light. Within an hour, comments poured in. A blind dog did this. He led someone there. This is the kind of story we need right now. Carter stood in the hallway, arms folded, staring at Blaze. He had known great dogs, but none had ever seen the world this clearly without eyes. The morning fog hung low over the outskirts of Red Elk Ridge, a place where the pines grew closer together and the gravel roads turned to hard-packed dirt. The landscape had an uneasy stillness, like it had seen too much and was holding its breath. Sheriff Carter Wells had driven this route many times before, but today the air was different. It wasn't just the chill. It was the silence that pressed in like a second skin. Beside him, in the patrol truck, Blaze sat upright, head slightly tilted as if listening to a frequency beyond human range. The blue blindfold wrapped firmly around his head caught the dim light leaking through the trees, almost glowing against his sable fur. He hadn't barked once since they left the station. He didn't need to. His body said more than words. The clue had come in the form of a snapped leather collar, worn, frayed, and stained with something too dark to be mud. It was found beneath the rusted cage that had held the 2 rescued puppies. Carved into the inner lining was a series of numbers. E0935RER. Carter recognized the last 3 letters immediately. Red Elk Ridge. The area had long been whispered about by hunters and hikers. "Don't wander too deep past marker 7, they'd say. "Something back there ain't right." Carter didn't believe in superstition. He believed in evidence, and right now. All signs pointed to a place no one had dared to look closely. He cut the engine 2 miles out and proceeded on foot. Blaze followed. No leash, no commands. The forest was dense here, branches arching low and sharp. They moved in silence, boots crunching faintly beneath pine needles and patches of icy soil. The deeper they went, the more Blaze's pace changed. His steps grew shorter, nostrils flared, body lowering toward the earth. Carter watched him closely. "You smell it?" Blaze let out a low, breathy whine, one Carter had come to recognize as warning. They moved another 100 yards when Blaze suddenly stopped. His ears twitched once, then again. Then he turned slightly to the left and walked off the trail entirely. Carter followed. They reached a clearing barely the size of a small barn. Hidden by a thicket of young spruce trees was a structure, low, wide, and crudely built from metal sheeting and cinder blocks. No signs, no markings, just an old floodlight nailed to a post and a steel door held shut by a heavy chain. Carter crouched low behind a fallen log. Blaze mirrored him. "Looks like a maintenance shed," he whispered, "but it stinks like blood." Blaze sniffed once, then moved toward the side of the structure. There, nearly hidden behind stacked crates, was a secondary hatch. The scent of urine, rust, and something foul wafted out from beneath it. Carter slid his phone from his pocket and quietly texted Deputy Harriet. "Possible illegal kennel at Red Elk Ridge. Need backup ASAP. Come quiet." Blaze's nose touched the edge of the door, then moved downward, sniffing along the hinges. His body stilled, his head turned toward Carter. Then he moved. The hatch wasn't locked, just jammed. With a gentle push of his shoulder and 2 sharp nudges of his snout, Blaze managed to wedge it open enough to squeeze inside. Blaze, wait. But the shepherd was already halfway through. Carter cursed under his breath, pulling his flashlight but keeping it off. He crawled after him. The space inside was tighter than expected, about 6 feet wide and 10 feet long. On either side were makeshift cages, wire mesh, rusted, damp, and inside them were dogs. 3 of them. A Doberman, ribs visible beneath its coat, a young pit bull mix, curled and shaking, and a chocolate lab. Older, eyes cloudy with fear, all wore scars, some fresh, some long healed. None had collars. Blaze walked toward the cages, his ears high, tail still. He paused in front of the Doberman and made a soft, chuffing noise. The dog stirred, but didn't growl. Then he moved to the others, repeating the sound, slower this time. Carter moved to the latch on the first cage. It was old, the locking mechanism jammed with grime. He gritted his teeth and forced it open with his pocket knife. One by one, he opened the cages. The dogs didn't rush. They only stepped forward once Blaze turned back toward the hatch. Then the door above slammed. Voices, footsteps, fast. Carter froze. A shout echoed from outside. "Someone's in here." Then Blaze did something Carter didn't expect. He turned toward the narrow entrance, planted his front paws, and growled. Not loud, but deep and clear. A warning. The dogs behind him didn't scatter. They stayed close, forming a trembling line at his back. The hatch burst open. A man dropped into the room, tall, heavy-set, mid-40s, with a patchy beard and a long coat splattered with mud. His name, though unknown to Carter then, was Denny Barlow, a former security contractor turned rogue trainer, known in whispers across 2 counties. Barlow raised a heavy baton, eyes wild. "You've got no idea what you're messing with?" But before he could finish, Blaze lunged, not to bite, not to maul, but to intercept. He collided with Barlow's legs, sending him crashing sideways into the wall. The man grunted, dropping the baton, momentarily dazed. Blaze stood over the fallen baton, head low, body coiled. Then the hatch opened again, this time followed by voices Carter knew. "Sheriff, we've got you covered," Harriet's voice. Seconds later, deputies poured into the shed. Barlow was cuffed on the floor. The 3 dogs were ushered into warm blankets and transported to safety. Carter stood in the middle of it all, heart racing, breath visible in the cold air. And Blaze, still blind, stood facing the open hatch, calm, composed, as if he'd seen it all coming. The sun had begun to rise earlier over Aspen Ridge, casting wide golden sheets across the sloping hills and pine-lined roads. Snow no longer clung to the rooftops. It softened under spring's warm breath and gave way to patches of wild grass and muddy soil. The whole town seemed to exhale, as if it had been holding something in all winter long, and now, at last, it let go. Sheriff Carter Wells stood on the back porch of his family ranch, coffee mug in hand, one boot resting on the old railing that had been sanded and repainted just last month. The ranch had been in the Wells family for 3 generations, though no one had truly lived in it since Evelyn passed. Carter had kept it locked for years, as if afraid the house would echo back memories he wasn't ready to face. But now it had life again. He turned toward the open field behind the barn, where the fence had been rebuilt with sturdy cedar posts, and the grass had grown in soft green waves. Out there, running freely in the morning light, was Blaze, still blind, still wearing the soft blue blindfold that had become part of him, and yet faster than any dog Carter had ever known. Blaze darted left, turned on a sharp angle, and led a small pack of puppies, rescued from the operation at Red Elk Ridge, in a chaotic, joyful game of chase. A black Labrador pup stumbled over her own feet trying to keep up. A wiry hound with white-tipped ears let out a bark of excitement. Blaze didn't lead with sight. He led with sound, with memory, with a deep intuitive sense of the world. He ran like someone who had finally been unchained. The raid at Red Elk Ridge had made headlines across Colorado. In total, 23 dogs had been rescued, many of them badly malnourished, scarred, or traumatized. The facility had been part of a cross-state dogfighting ring, and the footage collected by Carter's team, including Blaze's role, had reached not only local media, but national. Reporters had called, TV stations had sent emails, but Carter had politely declined them all, except for one. A local feature segment aired the week after the arrests. It was led by a gentle-voiced anchor named Rita Lanning, a woman in her early 60s with soft curls dyed honey blonde and a presence that felt more like a neighbor than a journalist. Rita was known for her People Who Make the Town Better series. She sat with Carter on the station steps, microphone clipped to her cardigan, and asked, "Do you believe a dog like Blaze can change the world?" Carter looked toward the kennel window, where Blaze rested that morning, nose touching the doorframe. "I don't think he needs to change the world," Carter replied. "He changed ours." Inside the station, June Wells sat at her desk near the corner window, her fingers smudged with colored pencil dust. She had always loved to draw, though she'd stopped for nearly a year after her mother died. But Blaze had unlocked something slow and steady. She was now finishing the final page of her first children's book. The cover showed a German shepherd wearing a bright blue blindfold, leading a line of small puppies across a grassy hill. The title, scrawled in bold block letters, read, "The Dog with the Blue Blindfold," by June Wells. Age 14. The publisher had come through a family friend, Ms. Nadine Harp, a tall woman in her late 40s with olive skin, always dressed in flowing scarves and retro glasses. Nadine ran Pine Valley Press, a local printing house known for spotlighting regional voices. After reading the draft, she'd called June personally. "You have something rare," Nadine said. "Honesty without pity, hope without sugar." June had smiled at that. Now, as she finished the final caption, he never needed to see the world to change it. She looked out the window and saw Blaze nudge a puppy gently away from a thorn bush, as if he somehow knew it was there. Her smile deepened. That afternoon, a small ceremony was held outside the sheriff's station. It was modest, just a circle of friends, deputies, and a few townsfolk, but meaningful. Blaze stood between Carter and June, tail still, ears perked. Deputy Harriet Lorne, usually all sarcasm and fast quips, wore her dress uniform and actually dabbed her eyes when the certificate was read aloud for exceptional bravery, service beyond expectation, and unwavering loyalty. Blaze is hereby recognized as Honorary K-9 Deputy of Aspen Ridge County Sheriff's Department. Badge number K-9 117B. Carter knelt and clipped the tag onto Blaze's collar. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if sensing the weight of it. The crowd clapped. Harriet muttered, "Damn well earned," and someone passed out lemonade and ginger cookies. Later that evening, Carter stood on the hill behind the barn, watching the sky melt into twilight. The porch light behind him flickered on. Down below, the pups had curled into a pile of fur and paws near the base of the tree line. Blaze sat just apart from them, listening to the wind, his head held high. June stepped up beside her father, arms folded, beanie pulled low over her forehead. "Do you think he knows what he did?" Carter didn't answer right away. "I think he knows what matters," he finally said. "That they're safe, that he found them, that he's still here." June smiled. "He doesn't need light," she said. "He became it. Sometimes. God doesn't send us heroes in shining armor. Sometimes, he sends us a blind dog with a blue blindfold, a quiet heart. and the courage to lead others out of darkness. Blaze never saw the world the way we do, but through faith, instinct, and love. He became a light for those still lost. Maybe that's what miracles truly are, not flashes of lightning, but gentle steps through the unknown, guided by something greater than sight. In our everyday lives, we're surrounded by people and animals who carry scars we cannot see. Some are waiting for someone to believe in them, others are already leading quietly, asking for nothing in return. So, if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment below and tell us about the moments when you've seen faith shine through fear. Type Amen if you believe that every soul deserves a second chance, no matter their past. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope and healing. And may God bless you for choosing compassion over judgment and light over silence.